Consciousness returned not as a sudden awakening, but as a slow, agonizing crawl from the depths of a viscous black ocean. There was no light, only a suffocating pressure that wrapped around the mind like thick velvet. The first sensation to breach the numbness was the vibration, a deep, rhythmic shuddering that traveled up through the cold steel floor, vibrating into bones and rattling teeth. It was a mechanical heartbeat, relentless and powerful, accompanied by the drone of a massive engine and the distinctive hum of tires devouring asphalt at high velocity. Adrian lay still, his military training, buried under layers of chemically induced fog, screamed at him to remain motionless until he could assess the threat. He tasted copper and bile. The air in the confined space was frigid, carrying the biting scent of stale diesel, rusted iron, and the faint, acrid tang of industrial lubricant. He tried to move his hands and found them free, though stiff with cold. He pushed himself up, his palms scraping against the corrugated metal flooring. The friction burned, a welcome anchor to reality. Slowly, the darkness began to resolve into shapes, not through light, but through the absence of it. The space was a cavernous rectangular box, a standard shipping container, or the reinforced cargo hold of a semi-truck. There were no windows, no slivers of sunlight, just the absolute, crushing dark. A groan echoed to his left. It was a guttural, confused sound. Adrian froze, his muscles coiling. He wasn't alone. "Stay down," he rasped, his voice sounding foreign to his own ears, like dry leaves scraping over concrete. "Don't move until you know what's broken." He didn't know why he said it, or where the authority in his tone came from. It was instinct, a muscle memory of command that had survived the erasure of his biography. He began to crawl towards the sound, his hands sweeping the floor in wide arcs. His fingers brushed against denim, then the warmth of human skin. He found a shoulder, broad and muscular. Where is this?" The voice belonged to a man, Caleb, though Adrian did not know the name yet. The name was just a ghost in the back of his mind. "A truck," Adrian whispered. "Moving fast. Highway speeds. Maybe faster." As his eyes adjusted to the pitch black, or rather, as his other senses compensated, he detected other breathing patterns. One rapid and shallow to his right, panic. Another slow and rhythmic near the far wall in consciousness or disciplined control. 4 of them, for bodies thrown into the belly of a mechanical beast hurtling through the unknown. The truck hit a bump, likely a pothole or an expansion joint in the road. The entire container lurched violently. Bodies slid across the slick metal floor. The impact jarred the breath out of them. It was then that the first piece of memory failed to return. Why? There was no answer. No recollection of a kidnapping, a bar fight, a mission gone wrong. Just a clean, terrifying slate of nothingness before this moment. "Is anyone hurt?" The voice was female, sharp and clinical. It came from the far wall. This was Nora. She didn't sound afraid. She sounded like she was solving a problem. "Check your extremities. Wiggle your toes. If you feel numbness in your spine, do not move. I'm cold." A younger female voice whimpered to Elara. "I can't see anything." "Why can't I see?" "We are in a container," Adrian said, standing up slowly. He reached out, his hand finding the ceiling. It was low, perhaps 7 feet high. Unlined steel. "It's freezing. We're likely in the north. Canada, maybe, or northern Europe. The air intake is minimal." He began to walk the perimeter, dragging his hand along the wall. It was a tactile map-making process. The walls were freezing, transmitting the outside temperature directly. If it was Canada in the winter, the wind chill outside the metal skin of the truck would be lethal. Inside, it was merely a refrigerator. His fingers snagged on something. A seam, a box welded to the wall. He traced the contours. It wasn't part of the standard container structure. It was an addition. Smooth plastic, a keypad, and a small mesh grid, a speaker, or a vent. "I found something," Adrian announced. Suddenly, a red light bathed the interior of the container in a bloody, monochromatic glow. It originated from the box Adrian had touched. The sudden illumination was blinding. The 4 prisoners shielded their eyes, squinting against the harsh crimson glare. For the first time, they saw each other, They were dressed identically in gray thermal jumpsuits, thin and insufficient for the creeping cold. No shoes, only thick wool socks. There were no names on the suits, only barcodes printed on the left breast pocket. Caleb was a giant of a man, his build suggesting years of heavy labor, his face etched with confusion and latent aggression. Nora was slender, but wired with tension, her eyes scanning her companions not for recognition, but for injuries. Elara looked young, perhaps in her early 20s, huddled in the corner, her arms wrapped around her knees, shivering violently, and Adrian saw his own reflection in the polished metal of the opposite wall, a face he recognized but couldn't place. Hard-angled, with a scar running through his left eyebrow, the box on the wall buzzed. A digital display flickered to life above the keypad. 0 hours 59 minutes and 59 seconds a timer, Nora said, stepping closer to Adrian. She didn't look at him, only at the red numbers counting down. What happens at 0? Nothing good, Adrian muttered. He examined the box closer. There were no wires exposed. It was a sealed unit. Look at the corners of the room. Up top, Caleb squinted, following Adrian's gaze. In each of the 4 upper corners of the container, small nozzles protruded from the steel. Gas, Caleb asked, his voice rising in volume. Are they going to gas us? Or vent the oxygen? Adrian corrected, his mind racing through structural schematics. This is a sealed environment. If those vents open and suck air out, we suffocate. If they pump something in ... we need to get out, Elara said, scrambling to her feet. She ran to the rear doors of the truck, massive double doors secured by internal locking bars. She threw her weight against the lever. It didn't budge. Help me. It's stuck. It's not stuck. It's locked from the outside. Caleb growled, pushing her aside gently to try his own strength. He strained against the iron, his veins bulging in his neck. The metal groaned, but the lock held firm. I can't move it. It's solid steel. Adrian ignored the doors. Escape wasn't about brute force. Not yet. Escape was about information. He turned back to the box with the timer. The numbers were ticking down relentlessly. 0 hours 58 minutes and 30 seconds. Analyze the situation, Adrian commanded, stepping back to address the group. We have less than an hour before whatever that timer controls activates. We are moving at approximately 60 to 70 miles per hour. The suspension is stiff. This is a commercial heavy hauler. The temperature is dropping. We have no tools. We have no memories. I remember. Blue? Elara whispered, her eyes unfocused. A blue room. A needle. Sedation. Nora said, checking Elara's pupils. Dilated. We were all drugged. Amnesia is likely a side effect of the cocktail they gave us, or ... double quote. She paused, touching the back of her head. Or something more permanent. Does anyone have a headache? Right here, at the base of the skull. They all reached back. There was no lump, but a tender spot, a small incision scar hidden by the hairline. Implants? Caleb asked, horror dawning on his face. Or extraction, Nora theorized. But we don't have time for diagnosis. We need to stop that timer. Adrian knelt by the box. He looked for screws, rivets, anything that could be undone. It was tamper-proof. I need something thin, metal, a shim. We don't have anything. Elara cried out, panic rising again. We have socks and jumpsuits. Think, Adrian snapped. Look at the floor. Look at the walls. Every prison has a flaw. Nothing is perfectly manufactured. They began to scour the container. The red light cast long, dancing shadows as the truck swayed around curves. The motion was nauseating. The vibration was constant, numbing the solace of their feet. Caleb was on his hands and knees near the front of the container. Here, he shouted. The floor plate. One of the rivets is loose. I can feel it rattle. Adrian slid over. The steel plating of the floor was bolted down, but one bolt head was slightly elevated. It had worked loose over thousands of miles of vibration. We need leverage, Adrian said. Caleb, can you rip the zipper off your jumpsuit? The zipper. The slider. It's metal. Hardened alloy usually. Give it to me. Caleb tore at his suit, ripping the zipper slider free with a grunt of exertion. He handed the small piece of metal to Adrian. Adrian jammed the narrow end of the zipper slider under the head of the loose bolt. It was a pathetic tool, but it was all they had. I need weight, Adrian said. Caleb, stand on the plate next to this one to depress it slightly. Nora, Elara, look for anything else, a loose splinter of wood from a pallet, a piece of wire, anything, while Caleb stomped on the adjacent plate, creating a hairline fracture of space. Adrian worked the bolt. It turned, a fraction of a millimeter. The rust screamed in protest. It's turning. Adrian gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. Keep pressure. It took 10 agonizing minutes. The timer ticked down. 0 hours 45 minutes and 0 seconds. Finally, the bolt came free. It was 6 inches long, heavy, with a sharp threaded end. A crude shank. A tool. Okay. Adrian breathed, holding the bolt like a treasure. Now we have a chisel. He returned to the timer box. He placed the tip of the bolt against the plastic casing, right at the seam where it met the wall. Caleb, I need you to hit the back of this bolt. Use your heel. Hard. If I break the box, will it trigger the trap? Caleb asked. If we don't break the box, the trap triggers anyway in 40 minutes. Nora pointed out calmly. Caleb nodded. He positioned his heel. Adrian held the bolt steady, his fingers dangerously close to the impact zone. Thud. The plastic cracked. Thud. A chunk of the casing flew off, revealing circuitry and a bundle of red and blue wires. Stop, Adrian ordered. He peered into the mechanism. It's not just a timer. It's a receiver. It's getting a signal. From the cab. Elara asked. Or via satellite. Adrian said. If I cut the power, the timer stops. But if it has a fail-safe. He looked at the wires. Red, blue, yellow. It was a cliché, but a deadly one. Elara, Adrian said suddenly. You're younger. Your eyes are better. Look at the circuit board. Trace the yellow wire. Does it go to the power source or the detonator relay? Elara leaned in, her breath hitching. She squinted, blinking away tears. She focused. The chaos in her mind slowed down as she looked at the patterns. It felt familiar. Circuitry, logic. It was a language she spoke, even if she didn't remember learning it. The yellow loops back, she murmured, her voice changing, becoming detached and analytical. It's a tamper loop. If you cut it, the circuit closes, instant activation. And the red, power, she said confidently. But there's a capacitor. If you cut the red, the capacitor discharges into the trigger. So, we can't cut the power, Caleb groaned. 0 hours 30 minutes and 0 seconds. We have to bypass it, Elara said. She looked at Adrian. Give me the bolt. I need to bridge the blue wire to the grounding plate before you cut the red. You sure? Adrian asked. I don't know my name, but I know this, Elara said. I know how electricity flows. Please. Adrian handed her the bolt. Her hands, previously shaking, became rock steady. She pressed the metal bolt against the exposed chassis of the box and touched it to the solder point of the blue wire. Sparks flew. The smell of ozone filled the air. Cut the red, she ordered. Now, I can't hold the arc forever. Adrian didn't hesitate. He used the sharp edge of the zipper slider, sawing frantically at the red wire. The insulation gave way. The copper strands severed. The timer display flickered. The red numbers froze at 0 hours 28 minutes and 12 seconds. Then, the display went dark. The red room light died, plunging them back into absolute darkness. Silence returned, save for the roar of the road. Did it work? Caleb's voice boomed in the dark. The vents didn't open, Nora noted. We are still breathing. Adrian slumped back against the wall, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Step 1 complete. We survived the wake-up call. Now what? Elara asked, her voice trembling again as the adrenaline faded. Adrian stared into the dark, his mind already formulating a map of the truck, calculating fuel stops, analyzing the driving patterns. Now, Adrian said, we find out what we are carrying, because they didn't put us in here alone. There are crates behind us, and we need to know if they contain our salvation, or something worse. The truck banked hard to the left, tires screaming against the pavement. The journey had only just begun. The darkness inside the container was no longer absolute, but it remained a heavy, oppressive force. After the red timer light had been extinguished, their eyes strained against the void, catching the faintest slivers of gray filtering in through microscopic gaps in the door seal's ghostly lines that offered no real illumination, only the maddening suggestion of a world rushing by outside. The roar of the tires was a constant, deafening drone, a sonic reminder of their velocity. They were moving fast, dangerously fast, the suspension groaning under the g-forces of every sharp turn. Adrian moved away from the disabled timer, his movements calculated and efficient despite the tremors of cold racking his body. He knew that survival was a sequence of small victories. They had stopped the gas, but they were still freezing, unarmed, and blind. "We need to inventory the cargo." Adrian's voice cut through the drone of the engine. "Stay low. Move slowly. We don't know if there are motion sensors. I can't see my own hands," Elara whispered, her voice hitching. She was still seated near the wall, hugging her knees. The logic that had allowed her to bypass the circuit board was fading, replaced by the primal fear of a child lost in the dark. "Use the walls," Nora instructed, her tone clinical and grounding. "Keep one hand on the corrugated steel. Orient yourself. Caleb, you're the strongest. Check the rear. Elara, stay with me. Adrian, take the front." They moved like ghosts in the gloom. Caleb crawled towards the center of the container, where large, looming shapes were bolted to the floor. These were the crates Adrian had sensed earlier. They were massive, rough-hewn wooden boxes reinforced with metal banding. Caleb ran his callous hands over the wood, feeling for a latch or a pry point. "It's sealed tight." Caleb grunted. "Wood is thick. I might be able to smash it, but it'll make noise." "Do it," Adrian commanded from the front. "We need resources. Light, clothes, weapons, anything." Caleb braced himself. He felt for the loose bolt Adrian had used earlier, the makeshift chisel, but realized Elara still had it. He didn't ask for it. Instead, he channeled his frustration into his muscles. He found the edge of the crate's lid, wedged his fingers into the narrow gap, and pulled. His biceps strained, the fabric of his jumpsuit stretching to its limit. With a torturous screech of tearing wood and popping nails, the lid gave way. He pushed the splintered wood aside and reached in. His hand met something cold and plastic. He pulled out a bundle. It was a heavy-duty flashlight. "Light," Caleb shouted, fumbling for the switch. A beam of blinding white lead light sliced through the darkness, illuminating the interior of the truck for the first time. The sudden brightness was shocking. They shielded their eyes, squinting as the space was revealed. It was a nightmare of industrial sterility. The walls were scarred and scratched. The floor was a grid of steel plates, and in the center, 3 large crates sat in a row. Caleb had opened the first one. "Shine it here," Nora ordered, moving towards Caleb. Inside the crate, packed in precision-cut foam, were supplies. Not random junk, but specific, high-grade gear. They were for pairs of tactical boots, heavy winter coats, thermal blankets, and several packs of military-grade rations. "MRS. They packed for us," Adrian said, walking into the circle of light. His face was grim. "This isn't a kidnapping. Kidnappers throw you in a trunk. They don't provide Gore-Tex jackets and 3,000-calorie meals. It's a loadout," Caleb said, tossing a pair of boots to Adrian. "Like a mission. Or a game?" Elara murmured. She picked up a jacket, her fingers tracing the fabric. "Why would they give us this if they wanted to gas us 10 minutes ago?" "The gas was a test," Adrian said, lacing up the boots rapidly. "Intelligence test. Stress test. If we failed, we died. We passed. So, we get rewards." As they dressed, the biting cold receded slightly. The tactical gear was perfectly sized. Adrian's boots fit as if they were molded to his feet. Nora's coat zipped up snugly. It was tailored. This realization sent a chill deeper than the freezing air. They had been measured, studied, and prepared for this long before they woke up. "Hold still," Nora said suddenly, grabbing Adrian's arm as he adjusted his collar. She pulled the flashlight from Caleb and shone it directly onto the back of Adrian's neck, just below the ear. "What is it?" Adrian tensed. You have a tattoo, Nora said, leaning in close. It looks fresh. The skin is irritated. I don't have tattoos, Adrian said, reaching up to touch the spot. It felt raised and tender. It's not a picture, Nora said, her eyes narrowing. It's a grid, like a QR code, but denser, complex geometric patterns. She spun Caleb around. Check him. Caleb pulled down his collar. There it was, a similar black square of intricate ink on his nape. Elara had one too? Nora checked her own reflection in the polished steel wall. The mark was there, stark against her pale skin. Barcodes. Caleb spat, rubbing his neck furiously as if to wipe it off. We're cattle. Data storage, Elara corrected softly, staring at Caleb's neck. It's data. I can see the patterns. It looks like encryption keys. We need to get out of here, Caleb growled. The discovery of the brand on his skin seemed to break his composure. The feeling of being owned, of being a lab rat, ignited a rage in him. He turned towards the back doors of the truck. I'm opening those doors. Caleb. Wait, Adrian warned. We are moving too fast. If you jump, you die. I'm not jumping, Caleb yelled, grabbing a heavy iron crowbar he had found at the bottom of the supply crate. I'm looking outside. I need to see where we are. He marched to the rear doors. The truck hit another bump, sending them staggering, but Caleb used the momentum to slam the crowbar into the locking mechanism of the massive doors. He didn't try to pick the lock. He tried to destroy it. He leveraged the bar, putting his entire massive weight behind it. Crack. Something gave way. Not the door, but the floor beneath him. Caleb, move, Adrian shouted, lunging forward. The steel plate Caleb was standing on didn't just bend. It retracted. It was a trapdoor, mechanized and silent. Instantly, the deafening roar of the road became a scream. The asphalt, a gray blur moving at 70 miles per hour, was visible just inches below his feet. Caleb fell. His legs went through the hole. Gravity and the suction of the air rushing beneath the truck yanked him down. He slammed his chest against the edge of the opening, the wind knocking the breath out of him. His legs dangled inches above the pavement that would grind bone to dust in milliseconds. Grab him. Nora screamed. Adrian was already there. He dove, sliding across the floor plates, and clamped his hand around Caleb's forearm. The pull was immense. The wind drag on Caleb's legs was like a heavy weight dragging him into a grinder. Pull, Adrian roared, his boots skidding on the metal floor. He had no leverage. Elara threw herself onto Adrian's legs to anchor him. Nora grabbed Caleb's other arm. The noise from the open hatch was thunderous, a chaotic mix of wind, engine roar, and tire whine. The cold air blasting up was freezing, stinging their eyes. Caleb's face was a mask of terror. He kicked wildly, trying to find purchase on the underside of the truck, but there was nothing but spinning rubber and death. Heave, Adrian shouted. Together, they pulled, straining, muscles burning. They dragged the massive man inch by inch back into the container. Caleb clawed at the floor, his fingernails breaking, until his knees cleared the lip of the trapdoor. They collapsed in a heap, panting, hearts hammering against their ribs. The trapdoor remained open, a gaping maw in the floor, revealing the deadly velocity of their prison. Snow was kicking up from the road, swirling into the container. Another test. Caleb gasped, rolling onto his back, staring at the ceiling. He was shaking uncontrollably. A penalty, Adrian said, wiping grease from his hands. He looked at the crowbar, which had fallen near the hole. You tried to force the exit. The system punished you. The doors are rigged, Adrian continued, standing up and cautiously approaching the hole. He looked down at the rushing road. If we try to open them, maybe the floor drops out completely, or maybe the brakes lock. We can't brute force this. Elara crawled towards the edge of the hole, fascinated and terrified. Look at the road, she shouted over the wind. There are no lines, no other cars. Adrian squinted. She was right. The asphalt was narrow, bordered by high banks of snow and dense, dark pine trees. We aren't on a highway anymore, Adrian realized. We're on a logging road, private land, or deep wilderness. That means no police, Nora said, no witnesses, and it means they can take us anywhere, Caleb added, Sitting up. Adrian looked at the open trapdoor. It was dangerous. Yes, but it was also an opening, an exit that wasn't locked. We can't jump, Adrian said, reading their minds. Not at this speed. You'd break every bone in your body, and then freeze to death in minutes. So, we wait. Caleb asked, angry but chastened. We wait for the truck to slow down, Adrian said. We watch that hole. The moment we see brake lights reflecting on the snow, or the speed drops, we go. He looked at the supplies. Pack everything, ration the food, check the other crates. If this is a game, we need to be ready for the next level. As they began to pack the gear, the truck lurched again, shifting gears. The engine note deepened. They were climbing. The air grew colder still, and the snow blowing up through the hatch became thicker. They were heading into the mountains, into the heart of the frozen void, and the only way out was through the hole in the floor that had almost eaten their friend. The hole in the floor was a mesmerizing, violent wound in the steel. It was roughly 3 feet wide, a jagged mouth that breathed freezing wind and snow into the container, transforming the stagnant air into a turbulent vortex. The roar was no longer a dull hum. It was a physical assault, a deafening cacophony of tires grinding against ice and the engine fighting the gradient of the mountain road. Adrian stood over the breach, staring down at the blurring asphalt. His eyes watered from the cold updraft, but he didn't blink. He was calculating. The road surface had changed. It was no longer the smooth, maintained tarmac of a highway. It was rutted, packed with hard snow and patches of black ice. The trees flashing by in the gap were taller now, ancient firs and spruces, their lower branches heavy with snow. They were climbing deep into the Canadian interior, likely traversing the coastal mountains or the Rockies. We can't stay here, Nora said, her voice raised to be heard over the wind. She was huddling near the front wall, wrapping the thermal blanket tighter around Elara. With that hatch open, the temperature is dropping too fast. Hypothermia will set in within an hour, even with the coats, and we don't know where this ends, Caleb added. He was sitting on one of the unopened crates, sharpening a splinter of wood with the zipper shank Adrian had made. It was a nervous tick. He kept glancing at the hole that had almost killed him, a mix of fear and fury in his eyes. If this is a black site transport, the destination is a cage. Or a grave. Adrian turned from the hole. We jump. The words hung in the freezing air, heavy and absolute. At this speed, Elara asked, her voice trembling. That's suicide. Staying is suicide, Adrian corrected calmly. Jumping is a calculated risk. Listen to the engine. We've downshifted twice in the last 10 minutes. We're climbing a steep grade. The driver is struggling with traction. I can feel the trailer swaying. He's going to have to slow down for the switchbacks. He moved to the center of the room, motioning for the others to gather. We need to armor up. We aren't jumping onto a mattress. We're hitting hard-packed snow at 30 or 40 miles per hour. If you hit a tree, you die. If you hit a rock, you break. We need padding. They turned their attention to the remaining crates. There was no time for delicacy now. Caleb used the crowbar to smash the lids open, splintering the wood with savage efficiency. Inside, they found more survival gear, but Adrian wasn't interested in the contents as much as the packaging. Thick, high-density foam lined the crates. Strip it, Adrian ordered. Cut it into panels. We need to protect the vital zones. Spine, ribs, knees, elbows. For the next 20 minutes, the container became a workshop of desperation. They used the jagged edges of the metal banding from the crates to slice the foam. Nora, using her surgeon's knowledge of anatomy, directed the placement of the makeshift armor. They stuffed slabs of foam under their jumpsuits and coats, securing them with duct tape found in the supply cache. They looked bulky and misshapen, like distorted distinct figures, but the foam offered a crucial layer of shock absorption. Elara found a coil of climbing rope in the last crate. She held it up, looking at Adrian. Do we tie ourselves together? No, Adrian said sharply. If one of us gets snagged or goes over a cliff, they'll drag the rest down. we jump individually, but we keep the rope, coil it around your torso. Caleb, you take the heavy tools. Nora, you carry the medical kit. Elara, take the rations. The truck lurched violently to the right. The tires spun, whining high-pitched as they lost grip on a patch of ice, then caught again with a jarring thud. The speed dropped perceptibly. It's starting, Adrian said, moving back to the trap door. The switchbacks. He's slowing down to navigate the turns. He lay on his stomach, peering over the edge of the hole. The wind was ferocious, blowing snow into his face, blinding him, but he could see the environment. To the right of the road, there was a sheer drop, a cliff falling away into a dark abyss of treetops. To the left, a steep embankment of snow rising into the forest. We have to jump to the left, Adrian shouted, spitting out snow. Into the bank, the snow will act as a brake. Do not jump to the right, you'll fall off the mountain. The truck groaned, the air brakes hissing loudly. The momentum shifted forward, pushing them off balance. They were entering a hairpin turn. The velocity dropped. 50, 40, 35, get ready. Adrian yelled, line up, Caleb, you're first. You're the heaviest, you'll punch a path. Nora, second. Elara, third. I'll bring up the rear. Caleb stood at the edge of the abyss. The road rushed by beneath him, a gray blur of death. He hesitated. It was the primal fear of the fall, the biological imperative to stay on solid ground. Trust the snow. Adrian barked, go. Caleb roared a sound of defiance against his own fear and leapt. He didn't just step out. He threw himself into the void, tucking his body into a ball as Adrian had instructed. He vanished instantly from their sight, swallowed by the white darkness outside. Nora. Now, Nora didn't scream. She took a breath, centered herself, and stepped into the hole with the precision of someone stepping into an operating theater. She was gone. Elara froze. She stared at the rushing road. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. I can't do it. The truck engine revved. They were coming out of the turn. The driver was shifting up. Speed was increasing. Elara, Adrian grabbed her shoulders, shaking her. Look at me. You solved the circuit. You saved us from the gas. This is just physics, force and trajectory. You are a variable in the equation, solve it. She looked at him, her eyes wide with panic, then clarity. Vector, she whispered, parabolic arc. Yes, jump. She closed her eyes and dropped through the floor. Adrian was alone. The container felt massive and empty. The speed was climbing again. He grabbed the last pack of supplies, checked the room one last time to ensure they left nothing behind that could track them, though the chips in their necks were tracking enough, and moved to the hole. He didn't just jump. He waited for a specific visual cue. He saw a mile marker post flash by, and then a gap in the trees. He timed his exit to land in the deepest shadow. He dropped. The transition from the enclosed container to the open air was a violent shock. The wind hit him like a physical wall. For a split second, he was suspended in the freezing night, weightless. Then, gravity reclaimed him. He hit the SNOWBANK. It wasn't soft. At 30 miles per hour, snow feels like concrete that shatters upon impact. He struck the embankment shoulder first. The foam padding absorbed the worst of it, but the force still knocked the wind out of him. He tumbled, the world becoming a chaotic spin of white and black. He rolled, over and over, snow forcing its way into his nose, his mouth, blinding him. Branches whipped against his face, tearing at his skin. He slammed into something hard, a tree trunk, and stopped. Pain radiated through his ribs, sharp and hot. He lay there for a moment, gasping for air, staring up at the canopy of pine needles. The sky above was a narrow slit of ink black, dusted with stars. Silence. The roar of the truck was fading. A dying growl in the distance, it continued its relentless climb up the mountain. It was gone. They were no longer prisoners of the machine. Now, they were prisoners of the wild. Adrian pushed himself up. The snow was waist deep. The cold was immediate and predatory, seeking every gap in his clothing. Caleb. Nora, he shouted. His voice sounded small, swallowed by the immense, silent forest. Here, a voice called out from down the slope. It was Caleb. Adrian waded through the snow, fighting the drift. He found Caleb pulling Nora out of a drift. She was limping slightly, clutching her left knee, but she nodded at Adrian. I'm okay. Just a twist. The padding saved my patella. Where is Elara? Adrian asked, looking around. I don't see her, Caleb said, panic edging into his voice. She jumped right before you. They scanned the white slope. The tracks in the snow were chaotic, deep furrows marking their violent arrival. Then, Adrian saw a small, motionless depression in the snow about 50 yards back, near a jagged outcrop of rock. Elara. They scrambled towards her. She was half buried, lying awkwardly against a fallen log. She wasn't moving. Nora reached her first, her hands immediately going to Elara's neck, checking for a pulse. Adrian knelt beside them, scanning the trees for threats, wolves, drones, or headlights returning down the road. She's breathing, Nora announced, relief flooding her voice. She's unconscious, concussion, likely, but her pulse is strong. Elara groaned, her eyelids fluttering. She opened her eyes, focusing hazily on the faces above her. Did I solve the equation? She whispered weakly. You solved it, Adrian said, a rare, faint smile touching his lips. You stuck the landing. He stood up and looked around. They were in the middle of a dense wilderness, miles from civilization, with no food other than what they carried, and the temperature dropping well below zero. The truck was gone, but the hunt had certainly not ended. The silence of the forest was heavy, watchful. We need to move, Adrian said, looking at the tracks they had made. We left a scar on the mountain a blind man could follow. If they check the sensors and see the container is empty, they'll send a cleanup crew. We need to find cover. Deep cover. Which way? Caleb asked, hoisting the groggy Elara onto his back effortlessly. Adrian looked up at the stars, orienting himself. Then he pointed not down toward the road, but up, deeper into the tree line. Up, Adrian said. They'll expect us to go downhill, toward the highway. So, we go into the storm. We go where the trucks can't follow. They turned their backs on the road and began the trudge into the white wilderness, the snow crunching loudly under their stolen boots. The silence of the Canadian wilderness was not empty. It was heavy, a suffocating blanket of white that absorbed sound, heat, and hope with equal indifference. The forest did not care that they were fugitives. It did not care about their erased memories or the people hunting them. To the forest, they were simply calories, biological heat sources slowly fading into the ambient zero. Adrian led the way, breaking the trail. The snow was thigh-deep, a powder so dry and cold it felt like wading through crushed glass. Every step was a negotiation with gravity and exhaustion. He lifted his leg, drove his boot down, compacted the drift, and shifted his weight, repeating the motion with mechanical grimness. His breath plumed before him in thick, white clouds that crystallized instantly on his eyelashes and the stubble of his beard. Behind him, Caleb was a juggernaut of endurance. He carried Elara on his back, her arms looped loosely around his neck, her head resting against his shoulder. She was conscious now, but drifting in and out, the concussion turning the world into a spinning carousel of vertigo. Caleb's breathing was a rhythmic engine noise, a harsh rasped huff-huff that synchronized with his trudge. He didn't complain. He simply endured, his massive frame acting as a heat shield for the smaller woman. Nora brought up the rear, her eyes scanning their back trail. The wind was picking up, a mournful howl that shook the tops of the towering spruce trees, sending cascades of snow down upon them like icy dust. It was a blessing in disguise. The wind and the falling snow were scrubbing their tracks from the face of the earth. Within an hour, their passage would be invisible. But the cold was the price they paid for this camouflage. They had been walking for 3 hours. The adrenaline of the jump had long since burned off, leaving behind the acidic residue of fatigue. The cold was beginning to penetrate the high-tech layers of their stolen gear. It started in the fingers and toes, a dull ache that sharpened into a stinging needle pain. then slowly faded into a dangerous numbness. We need to stop. Nora's voice was thin, carried away by the wind almost instantly. Elara's shivering has stopped. That's not good. That staged a hypothermia. Adrian stopped. He didn't turn around immediately. He scanned the terrain ahead. They had climbed out of the valley floor and were navigating a ridgeline. To his left, a dense cluster of fallen trees created a natural windbreak. The roots of a massive overturned hemlock formed a crude roof, protected from the biting wind by a wall of earth and snow. There, Adrian pointed. The root ball. We take 20 minutes. We need calories and a heat check. They huddled into the small hollow beneath the massive roots. It was cramped, smelling of frozen earth and decaying pine needles, but it was out of the wind. The temperature difference was immediate and merciful. Caleb gently lowered Elara onto a bed of pine boughs Nora quickly gathered. Elara looked pale, her skin translucent against the dark collar of her jacket. Her eyes were glassy. I can hear it, she whispered, clawing at her neck. Hear what? Caleb asked, rubbing his gloved hands together to generate friction. The wind. No. Elara winced, her fingers digging into the skin behind her ear, right over the strange barcode tattoo. The buzzing. High pitch. Like a mosquito inside my skull. It's getting louder. Nora moved instantly, her fatigue forgotten. She knelt beside Elara, pulling the flashlight from her pocket. She clicked it on, shielding the beam with her hand to prevent it from being seen from the air. She shone the light on Elara's neck. The skin around the black geometric tattoo was angry and red. But it wasn't just irritation. Under the beam of the light, something beneath the skin pulsed, a faint, rhythmic bioluminescence, visible only through the thin tissue of the neck. Turn off the light, Adrian hissed, grabbing Nora's wrist. I see it, Nora said, her voice dropping to a whisper. It's active, it's a transponder, Adrian said, the knowledge surfacing from the dark waters of his suppressed memory. Subdermal, powered by body heat. It transmits an encrypted burst signal. That's the buzzing she hears. It's interacting with her auditory nerve. If it's transmitting, Caleb said, his eyes widening in the gloom, they know exactly where we are. They know where she is. Adrian corrected. And by extension, us. He touched the back of his own neck. He felt nothing but cold skin. Why is hers active and ours aren't? Maybe the impact, Nora theorized, examining the swelling. She hit her head. The trauma might have damaged the shielding or triggered a distress mode. Or maybe ... double quotes. She paused, her fingers probing the lump. Maybe it's damaged and leaking. If the battery casing is cracked, lithium, or whatever powers this thing is leaching into her bloodstream. That explains the toxicity signs, the pallor. It's not just the concussion. It has to come out, Adrian said flatly. The silence in the small burrow deepened. The wind howled outside. A beast denied entry here, Caleb asked, looking at the dirty snow, the pine needles, the utter lack of sterility. We don't have a hospital. We don't have anesthesia. If we leave it, the signal brings the hunter team down on our heads within the hour, Adrian said. Or the toxin kills her. There is no choice. Nora looked at her hands. They were trembling slightly from the cold. She clenched them into fists, forcing the blood to flow, forcing the tremors to stop. She was a surgeon. She didn't remember her medical school, her residency, or her first save. But she remembered the discipline. See one. Do one. Teach one. I need the kit, Nora said, her voice hardening into steel. Get the knife. The tactical one from the boot sheath, and the lighter, and the whiskey. They had found a small metal flask in one of the survival coats, a luxury item included by their mysterious captors, perhaps as a twisted irony. Now, it was medicine. Adrian drew the knife. It was a fixed-blade combat knife, matte black, serrated on one side, razor-sharp on the other. He handed it to Nora. She poured whiskey over the blade, the smell of alcohol sharp and pungent in the freezing air. Then she flicked the lighter, running the flame along the steel edge until the alcohol burned off and the metal darkened with soot. Elara, Nora said softly, leaning over the girl. Listen to me. You have a splinter, a bad one. I need to take it out. Elara looked up, her eyes wide and fearful. It hurts, I know. It's going to hurt more, but only for a minute. Then the noise stops. Then you're safe. Nora looked at Caleb. Hold her. She cannot move. If she flinches, I could sever the carotid artery. Do you understand? You have to be a statue. Caleb nodded, his face pale. He moved behind Elara, wrapping his massive arms around her shoulders and head, immobilizing her like of ice. I've got you, kid. I've got you. Just look at the snow. Count the snowflakes. Adrian. Light. Nora commanded. Adrian positioned the flashlight, focusing the beam on the inflamed patch of skin. Nora took a breath. She visualized the anatomy, the sternocleidomastoid muscle, the jugular vein, the delicate web of nerves. The object was superficial, sitting just above the muscle fascia, but the inflammation made the tissue swollen and unpredictable. Bite down on this, Adrian said, placing a roll of thick fabric from the ration bag between Elara's teeth. Nora touched the knife to the skin. The metal was cold now. She cut. Elara screamed, a muffled, guttural sound that was swallowed by the gag and the howling wind. Her body convulsed, a violent spasm of pure agony, but Caleb held her fast. He was a rock, his own eyes squeezed shut, tears leaking out as he absorbed her pain. Blood welled up, dark and thick in the cold air. Nora didn't hesitate. She couldn't afford to be gentle. She had to be fast. She widened the incision, the scalpel-sharp knife parting the tough skin. She saw a glint of silver and black amidst the red. I see it, she whispered. Tweezers. I need tweezers. We don't have tweezers, Adrian said. Use a knife point, she told herself. She angled the blade, sliding the tip under the foreign object. It was anchored. Tiny barbs held it in place. It's hooked in. Pull it, Adrian said. Rip it if you have to. Nora grit her teeth. She hooked the edge of the device and leveraged the knife. She pulled. There was a sickening sound of tearing tissue. Elara's scream pitched up, then cut off abruptly as she passed out from the pain. She's out. Caleb gasped. She's limp. Keep holding her. Nora snapped out with one final twist. The device popped free. It skittered across the frozen ground, a small, pill-shaped object, covered in blood and slime. Nora immediately pressed a pad of gauze from the first aid kit onto the wound. Pressure. Caleb, hold pressure here. Hard. Caleb shifted his hand, pressing the gauze against the wound, stemming the flow of blood. Nora slumped back, the bloody knife falling from her shaking fingers into the snow. She hyperventilated for a moment, the adrenaline crash hitting her like a physical blow. Adrian picked up the device. He wiped it on the snow. It was intricate, far too advanced for consumer tech. It was military, or something beyond military. The black casing was etched with the same geometric patterns as their tattoos, and it was still pulsing, a tiny red LED blinking rapidly. It's broadcasting a distress beacon, Adrian said. Since you cut it out, it thinks the host is dead. It's screaming for retrieval. He placed the device on a flat rock. He picked up the heavy rock they had used to weigh down the tarp earlier. Crack. He brought the rock down with primal force. He hit it again, and again, until there was nothing left but shattered plastic and silicon dust mixed with the snow. Is it over? Caleb asked, looking down at Elara. She was pale, breathing shallowly, but the bleeding had slowed. For her? Yes, Nora said, checking the wound. She applied a butterfly closure strip and taped a clean bandage over it. She needs rest, fluids, but the poison is out. Adrian looked at Nora, then at Caleb. He touched his own neck again. We all have them, Adrian said quietly. Every one of us is a walking beacon. Elara's was just the first to malfunction. So, we have to cut them all out? Caleb asked, his voice hollow. Not here, Nora said, shaking her head. We can't risk the infection, and we can't risk the blood loss. We need a clean room. We need tools. Then we need to find civilization, Adrian said. But not the towns. The towns have cameras. We need something isolated. He stood up, walking to the edge of their shelter. The snow was easing up. The clouds were breaking, revealing a jagged moon. In the distance, far across the valley, a single, faint light flickered. It wasn't a star. It was yellow and steady. Fire, Adrian said. or a light bulb. He pointed into the dark abyss of the forest. There, 5 miles, maybe 6, a structure, a cabin. Caleb asked, lifting Elara gently, wrapping her back into the blankets. A target. Adrian corrected. If there are people, there are supplies. If there are supplies, we survive. And if they are hostile, Nora asked, cleaning the knife and sheathing it. Adrian turned to them. The soldier in him was fully awake now. The amnesia had taken his name, but it hadn't taken his lethality. We are 4 ghosts with nothing to lose, he said. If they are hostile, God help them. They packed their meager camp. The respite was over. They moved back into the deep snow, heading towards the solitary light in the distance, leaving a patch of blood-soaked snow behind them, a red warning to anything that dared to follow. The light was a lie. It beckoned them with the promise of warmth, a golden beacon flickering through the skeletal branches of the lodgepole pines, but it offered no safety. It was merely a lure. The trek from the ridge had been a brutal descent into a valley choked with snowdrifts. The wind had died down, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like pressure on the eardrums. Every snap of a twig, every crunch of a boot, sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. Adrian led the formation, moving with a predator's caution. His exhaustion was deep, a leaden weight in his bones, but his senses were hyper-tuned. The forest didn't feel wild here. It felt manicured. It felt watched. As the trees thinned, the structure emerged from the gloom. It wasn't a simple shack. It was a sturdy log cabin, built from rough-hewn timber, dark and weathered. Smoke curled lazily from a stone chimney, drifting straight up into the starry sky. The yellow light spilled from a single window on the ground floor, casting long, distorted shadows across the clearing. They stopped at the tree line. 50 yards out. It looks empty, Caleb whispered, his breath steaming. He had Elara propped against a tree. She was conscious, but weak, her eyes tracking the movement of the smoke. Maybe a ranger station, or a trapper. Too quiet, Adrian murmured. He scanned the perimeter. The snow around the cabin was pristine. No footprints leading in or out. No vehicle tracks. Just a flat, white expanse of undisturbed powder. If someone is inside keeping that fire going, they haven't been outside in days. Or they cleaned their tracks. We need the heat. Adrian, Nora said, shivering violently. Her surgeon's hands were tucked into her armpits, useless claws of frozen flesh. We can't survive another night in the open. We have to risk it. We go in. Adrian agreed. But we don't walk to the front door. We circle. Caleb, stay here with Elara. Keep the knife. If you hear shooting, you run the other way. Do not come for us. Adrian and Nora moved to the flank, sticking to the shadows of the tree line. They approached the cabin from the blind side, away from the lit window. Adrian stopped 10 feet from the clearing's edge. He held up a hand. Something was wrong with the snow. The surface was too uniform. The wind carved natural ripples sastrugi into the snowpack. But here, the ground near the cabin was smooth, almost unnatural. What is it? Nora breathed. Adrian crouched, picking up a fallen branch. He tossed it lightly onto the snow. 5 feet ahead of them. Snap. The branch didn't just land. It triggered a release. A section of the snow, a perfect square of camouflage, collapsed inward. A spike log, suspended by a tension line buried in the snow, swung down from the trees above in a lethal arc, sweeping through the space where a standing man's chest would be. The spikes were rusted iron, long and serrated. The log swung back and forth, creaking on its hidden hinge, the only sound in the clearing. Nora stared at the swinging death, her eyes wide. That's a booby trap, a deadfall, perimeter defense, Adrian said, his voice flat. He looked at the cabin with new eyes. It wasn't a home. It was a fortress, or an arena. This isn't a hunter. Hunters trap animals. This is designed for people. Who puts medieval traps around a cabin in Canada? Someone who wants to catch something specific, Adrian said. Follow my footsteps exactly. Do not deviate. They moved closer, navigating a minefield of primitive engineering. Adrian spotted a tripwire glinting in the moonlight, monofilament fishing line strung ankle-high between 2 saplings. He stepped over it. He pointed out a depression in the snow that hinted at a pungy pit-sharpened stakes buried at the bottom of a hole. This was a kill zone. The density of the traps suggested paranoia, or worse, preparation. They reached the cabin wall. It was solid logs, chinked with moss and mortar. Adrian crept to the window and peered inside. The interior was rustic but strange. There was a fireplace with a roaring fire gas fed, he realized. The logs were fake ceramic, the flame eternal and automated. That explained the lack of footprints. No one needed to chop wood. The room was furnished with a single table, for chairs, and a wall of monitors. The screens were dark. It's automated, Adrian whispered. It's a way station. A safe house. He moved to the back door. It was locked, but the lock was a simple keypad, similar to the one in the truck. He looked at the wood frame. It was reinforced. Caleb. Adrian signaled with a low whistle. Bring her. Carefully. Follow my tracks. Once the group was reunited at the back wall, Adrian examined the door. He didn't have the tools to hack it, but he had physics. The hinges are on the outside, he noted. Security flaw, or intentional design, using the crowbar Caleb had carried from the truck. Adrian worked the hinge pins loose. It took gritty, silent effort, but the pins popped out one by one. He pulled the heavy door open from the hinge side. They slipped inside. The warmth hit them like a physical blow, dizzying and wonderful. The air smelled of cedar and propane. They collapsed onto the floor, the sudden temperature change making their skin prickle and burn as blood rushed back to the capillaries. Check the perimeter, Adrian ordered, though his own legs felt like rubber. Nora, get Elara near the fire. Caleb, secure the door. Adrian moved to the wall of monitors. They were off, but a small red light blinked on the console. He touched a key. The screens flared to life. They showed the forest, night vision cameras, thermal imaging. He saw their own footprints glowing hot white against the cool blue of the snow. He saw the swinging log trap, still moving slightly. He saw the truck miles away now, climbing a distant pass. They're watching, Adrian said. But not from here. This is a relay station. He turned to the rest of the room. On the table, there were 4 items laid out with military precision. 4 handguns, polymer frames, suppressors attached. No brand markings. It's a resupply point, Caleb said, walking to the table. He reached for a gun. Don't touch it. Adrian barked. The sharpness of his voice froze Caleb. Adrian walked to the table. He stared at the weapons. A headache spiked behind his eyes, sudden, blinding pain that brought him to his knees. Flashback. Sand, burning hot sand. The smell of cordite. A man in a suit handing him a similar weapon. The architecture of a revolution is built on silence. Adrian. Do your job. The weight of the gun in his hand. The feeling of recoil. The target falling. Adrian. Nora was at his side, her hand on his shoulder. He gasped, blinking away the desert sun, returning to the wooden cabin. He was shaking. I know this gun, he whispered. I know how to strip it. I know the trigger pull weight. 5.5 pounds. He picked it up. His hands moved with a blurring speed he didn't command consciously. He ejected the magazine, checked the chamber, verified the firing pin, and reassembled it in under 3 seconds. It was a dance of muscle memory. You're a soldier, Caleb said quietly. No, Adrian said, looking at the weapon with a mix of familiarity and revulsion. Soldiers follow orders. Soldiers wear uniforms. This ... He gestured to the unmarked gun. This is a tool for ghosts. I wasn't a soldier. I was a cleaner. And the rest of us. Elara asked from the floor. She was looking at the wall opposite the monitors. There was a corkboard. Pinned to it were photos, not of targets, of them. Photos of Nora in a white coat, walking through a hospital corridor, but looking over her shoulder, terrified. A photo of Caleb on a construction site, handing a thick envelope of cash to a man in a dark car. A photo of Elara sitting in a server room, handcuffed to a chair, surrounded by federal agents, and a photo of Adrian ... standing over a body, looking at the camera with dead, cold eyes. We aren't victims, Nora realized, walking slowly to the board. She touched her own photo. We're criminals. Or assets. The cabin isn't a test to kill us, Adrian said, sliding the gun into his waistband. He felt a dark sense of completion with the weapon against his hip. It's a tutorial. They stripped our memories, dumped us in the wild, gave us threats to sharpen our instincts, and now they are rearming us. Why? Caleb asked. Because they have a job for us, Adrian said, and they wanted to make sure we were still capable of doing it before they gave us the instructions. A printer in the corner of the room whirred to life. A single sheet of paper slid into the tray. Adrian picked it up. It had one line of text, printed in bold courier font. Level 1 complete. Proceed to coordinates 51.4 116.2 W. Do not be late. They're watching right now, Adrian said, looking up at the black dome of a camera lens in the corner of the ceiling. He raised the gun and aimed it at the lens. Don't, Elara said. If you shoot it, we fail. We need to play along until we can break the game. Adrian lowered the gun. Get warm. Eat the food. Take the weapons. We leave in 3 hours. We're doing what they want. Caleb asked, angry. We're surviving, Adrian said. Until we find out who is holding the leash, we walk the path. But now we have teeth. Outside, the wind picked up again, resetting the snow traps, burying their tracks, and sealing them in the belly of the hunter's cabin. The coordinates led them away from the shelter of the forest and toward the desolate expanse of the Blackwater Valley. The sun had risen, a pale, heatless disk hanging in a sky the color of bruised iron. The light offered no comfort. It only exposed them. In the dense tree line, they were ghosts, hidden by shadow and pine. Out here, on the edge of the frozen lake that dominated the valley floor, they were ink blots on a pristine white page. Adrian crouched behind a boulder at the forest edge, scanning the expanse. The lake was vast, a mile-wide stretch of ice dusted with wind-blown snow. On the far side, the terrain rose sharply into a wall of jagged cliffs. The only way across was the lake itself or a rotting timber bridge that spanned the narrowest part of the bottleneck, where the lake fed into a rushing, frozen river. It's a kill box, Adrian murmured, adjusting the unfamiliar weight of the polymer pistol in his waistband. If we go out on the ice, we have zero cover. If we take the bridge, we're funneled into a single file. The coordinates point to the cliffs, Elara said, checking the GPS device they had taken from the cabin. Her face was still pale from the surgery, a bandage stark white against her neck, but her eyes were sharp. There's an access road on the other side. We have to cross. We take the bridge, Caleb decided, looking at the rotting structure. It was an ancient logging trestle, groaning under the weight of decades of snow. The ice looks thin near the center. I'm not risking falling through. They moved out. The snow here was shallower, scoured away by the wind, revealing patches of hard, frozen earth. They reached the bridge. It was a skeleton of timber and rusted iron, spanning a gorge where the black water churned violently, refusing to freeze completely due to the current's speed. The drop was 50 feet into jagged rocks and freezing spray. They were halfway across when the sound began. It wasn't the roar of a truck this time, nor the howl of a wolf. It was a high-pitched, synchronized whine, like a hive of angry hornets. Down, Adrian shouted. They dropped to the wooden planks just as a shadow swept over them. A drone, matte black and sleek, roughly the size of a hawk, banked sharply overhead. It wasn't a camera drone. Mounted beneath its chassis was a terrifyingly functional muzzle. Crack THWIP. A bullet splintered the wood inches from Nora's hand. Move. Run, Adrian roared, scrambling to his feet. The single drone was joined by 2 more, rising from the tree line they had just left. They were being herded. The drones didn't fire to kill immediately. They fired to panic, to drive the prey forward. The group sprinted across the rotting bridge. The timbers shook violently under Caleb's heavy strides. The drones buzzed and swooped, firing suppressed shots that chewed up the railing and the deck. They're trying to cut us off. Elara screamed, stumbling as a plank gave way beneath her boot. Caleb grabbed her jacket and hauled her up without breaking stride. They reached the midpoint of the bridge. Ahead, on the far side, a dark figure stepped out from behind a rock. It wasn't a drone. It was a man, clad in heavy white winter tactical gear, holding a rifle. He didn't fire. He simply stood there, blocking the exit. Ambush. Adrian skidded to a halt, raising his pistol. But the range was too far for a handgun. The sniper on the cliff had the high ground and the reach. Back. Caleb yelled, "Go back." They turned, but the drones dropped lower, hovering over the entry of the bridge, their weapons trained on the retreat path. They were trapped in the middle of the span, suspended over the deadly gorge. Then, the sniper fired. He didn't aim at them. He aimed at the bridge supports. Boom. Boom. To explosive rounds struck the main support beams on the far side. The ancient wood, rotted and brittle, shattered. The bridge groaned a sound like a dying leviathan. The far end of the span dropped 5 feet, leaving the bridge hanging precariously at a steep angle. Gravity took over. They slid down the slick, icy planks. Adrian jammed his boot into a gap in the wood, catching Nora's hand. Caleb slammed his combat knife into the deck to anchor himself, holding Elara with his other arm. The bridge was collapsing. It was detaching from the far cliff, slowly peeling away. "We have to jump," Nora screamed, looking at the black water below. "No!" Caleb roared over the wind. "Look!" Below them, jutting out from the canyon wall, was a narrow service ledge, perhaps part of the original dam structure. It was reachable, but only if they slid down the collapsing bridge and leapt at the last second. But the bridge was twisting. The main beam was snapping. If they all moved at once, the shift in weight would tear the structure free before they could reach the ledge. Caleb looked at the beam. It was held by a single rusted iron cable that was fraying rapidly under the tension. "It won't hold us all," Caleb said. His voice was calm, contrasting with the chaos around them. He looked at Elara, the girl he had carried through the snow. He looked at Nora, who had healed him. He looked at Adrian, the leader. Caleb stood up. He released his anchor. He didn't slide down toward safety. He lunged up, toward the fraying cable. He grabbed the steel line with his bare hands. The cable bit into his flesh, but he didn't flinch. He wrapped his arm around the structural post and hauled back on the cable, using his massive body as a living tensioner. He braced his legs against the splintering deck. "I've got it," Caleb roared, his face turning red with exertion. "I'm holding the angle. Go, now." By taking the strain off the main joint, he stabilized the bridge just enough to stop the twisting. The path to the ledge was clear. "Caleb." "No!" Elara cried. "Go." Caleb bellowed, the veins in his neck bulging. "Run, damn it." Adrian grabbed Elara and Nora. He knew. He saw the math. Caleb was buying them time with his life. They slid down the deck. Adrian threw Nora onto the ledge, then swung Elara across. He paused, looking back up the slanted, dying bridge. Caleb was alone. The drones were circling closer. The sniper on the cliff was reloading. Caleb wasn't looking at the enemies. He was looking at his friends. He nodded. Once. A simple, workmanlike nod. "Job done." The cable snapped. With a thunderous crash. The bridge detached completely from the cliff. Caleb didn't scream. He rode the wreckage down. The massive timber structure fell into the gorge, smashing into the rocks and the churning black water below. A plume of icy spray rose up, obscuring the fall. "Caleb!" Elara screamed, her voice echoing off the canyon walls. Adrian dragged her back into the shadows of the ledge just as the sniper's bullets began to chip the stone where they had been standing. "He's gone," Adrian said, his voice harsh and cold. He forced them into a narrow tunnel opening at the back of the ledge. "Move, if we stop." He died for nothing. They ran into the dark tunnel, the sound of the crashing bridge still ringing in their ears. The loss was a physical hole in the group. The muscle, the heart, the protector was gone. Adrian stopped in the darkness of the tunnel. He leaned against the damp rock wall. He felt a rage building in his chest, hot and suffocating. This wasn't a game anymore. It wasn't a test. It was a war. They killed him. Nora whispered, wiping tears from her face with a dirty, bloody hand. "They herded us there and they executed him." "No," Adrian said. He checked his weapon. "They tried to kill us all." Caleb changed the outcome. He looked at the others. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp hate. "We aren't just escaping anymore," Adrian said in the dark. "We're going to find the throat of this beast, and we're going to cut it." They turned and walked deeper into the mountain, leaving the daylight and their friend behind. The tunnel was a throat of damp stone that swallowed them whole, muffling the roar of the collapsing bridge until it was nothing but a distant, vibrating memory. The air inside was stagnant, smelling of wet limestone and the metallic tang of old copper wiring that ran along the ceiling like severed arteries. They walked in a silence that was heavier than the darkness. The absence of Caleb was a physical void in their formation. Without his massive silhouette leading the way, the group felt exposed, fragile, unbalanced. Adrian took point, his weapon drawn, the tactical light slicing through the gloom. He moved with a mechanical rigidity, compartmentalizing the grief. In his mind, Caleb was not dead. He was a casualty report, a statistic of the mission. To mourn now was to die next. But Nora could not flick that switch. Behind him, she walked with a hitch in her breath, her hands trembling not from the cold, but from the shock of the empty space beside her. Elara trailed, her face set in a mask of grim determination, the pain of her neck wound sharpened by the cold dampness of the tunnel. They emerged an hour later. The tunnel mouth opened onto a jagged shelf of rock overlooking a winding ribbon of asphalt, a secondary highway carved into the flank of the mountain range. It was night again. The sky was a vast, indifferent dome of stars, and the wind whipped the snow across the road in mesmerizing, serpentine patterns. Civilization, Nora whispered, staring at the yellow lines on the road below. We can flag someone down. Go to the police. No police, Adrian said, scanning the road. The drones, the sniper, the tattoos. This isn't a criminal enterprise. It's institutional. If we go to the police, we just hand ourselves back to the cleaners. We need transport, and we need to get off the grid. They descended the scree slope, sliding amidst loose shale and snow until their boots hit the hard, frozen pavement. They hid in a culvert beneath the road, waiting. The cold was biting, gnawing at their exhaustion. 20 minutes later, headlights swept across the snowbanks. A vehicle was approaching, moving slowly, a spotlight sweeping the power lines that ran parallel to the road. A utility truck. Perfect, Adrian murmured. Stay low. As the truck slowed to inspect a transformer on a pole, Adrian moved. He didn't run. He flowed, a shadow detaching itself from the dark concrete of the culvert. He crossed the road in a crouch, timing his movement with the sweep of the spotlight. When the driver, a heavy-set man in a reflective vest, opened his door to step out, Adrian was already there. There was no conversation. Adrian didn't threaten him. He simply applied a sleeper hold, a precise compression of the carotid arteries. The man slumped into unconsciousness in seconds. Adrian caught him before he hit the ground, dragging him gently into the snowbank and securing his hands with zip ties found on the man's own belt. He took the keys, the radio, and a heavy parka, tossing the code to Nora. Get in, Adrian signaled. They piled into the cab of the truck. It smelled of stale coffee and cigarettes, the most beautiful scent they had ever encountered. The heater was blasting. Adrian put the truck in gear and pulled onto the road, driving without headlights for the first mile, navigating by moonlight to avoid alerting any trailing drones. Check the onboard computer, Adrian ordered Elara. Disable the GPS tracker. I don't want dispatch knowing we're off route. Elara pulled the ruggedized laptop from its mount. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. This is a utility maintenance unit, she said, her eyes reflecting the blue glow of the screen. It has access to the regional grid maps. Wait, double quote. She paused, typing a command line. I'm seeing a power anomaly, a massive draw on the grid, about 40 miles north. It's marked as a substation, but the consumption is equivalent to a small city. Coordinates, Adrian asked. 51.4 N, 116.2 W. Elara read. The same coordinates from the cabin. It's not a meeting point, Adrian realized, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. It's the source. The drive took an hour. They moved through the desolate beauty of the Canadian Rockies, the road winding higher into the peaks. As they approached the coordinates, the road ended at a heavy security gate. Adrian killed the engine a mile back, concealing the truck in a dense logging trail. They proceeded on foot, utilizing the white winter camouflage gear they had scavenged. They crested a ridge and looked down. The black site was not a dungeon. It was a masterpiece of brutalist architecture nestled in a hanging valley, surrounded by razor wire fences and floodlights that turned the snow into a blinding white moat. The main building was a monolith of concrete and glass, partially buried in the mountainside. Steam vented from massive cooling towers, the heat signature of a massive underground data center. "It looks like a research institute," Nora whispered, peering through a pair of binoculars found in the truck. "Or a pharmaceutical company." "It's a prison," Adrian corrected. "Just not for bodies. For minds. Look at the perimeter," he pointed. "Motion sensors. Thermal cameras every 50 feet. Patrols with dogs. This isn't just guarded. It's sealed." "How do we get in?" Elara asked. "We can't fight an army." "We don't fight," Adrian said. "We infect." He turned to Elara. "Can you access their local network from here? If I get you to that junction box on the outer fence." Elara studied the terrain. "If I can tap into the fiber line, I can loop the camera feed. I can make us invisible for maybe 3 minutes, but the encryption will be military grade. I need a hard connection." "We'll get you there," Adrian promised. They moved down the slope, timing their descent with the rotation of the perimeter cameras. The snow was there now, burying their sound. They reached the outer fence, a towering structure of electrified mesh. Adrian located the junction box, a gray metal housing buried halfway in a snowdrift. He pried the cover open with his knife. Elara connected the utility truck's laptop, which she had brought with her, stripping the wires with her teeth and twisting them into the terminal. "I'm in," she whispered, her breath hitching. "God, the data stream is massive. They aren't just storing data. They're processing memories. I see files. Thousands of them, categorized by emotional triggers. Fear, love, regret. Find the entrance protocols," Adrian hissed, watching a patrol vehicle drive slowly past on the other side of the fence. "Got it. Service entrance. Sector 4, a delivery is scheduled in 10 minutes. Liquid nitrogen for the cooling arrays. If I spoof the transponder signal, I can open the gate early." "Do it." "Done." "But Adrian double quotes." Elara hesitated, looking at the screen. "I found a file. It's tagged subject, Caleb." Adrian froze. "Is he alive?" "The file status is terminated, but the timestamp is from before the bridge. It says subject terminated from program due to instability. Scheduled for disposal. They plan to kill him anyway," Nora said, her voice shaking with rage. "The bridge was just an opportunity." "Focus," Adrian commanded, though his jaw was set like granite. "Open the gate." A heavy buzzer sounded in the distance. The massive steel gate of Sector 4 groaned and began to slide open. "We have 3 minutes before the system realizes the truck in there," Elara said, disconnecting the laptop. They sprinted. They crossed the open ground of the perimeter, exposed to the floodlights, trusting that Elara's loop of the camera feed held true. They slipped through the closing gate just as the heavy steel slammed shut behind them. They were inside. The loading dock was cavernous, filled with shipping containers and pallets. It was warm here, the hum of machinery vibrating through the concrete floor. They hid behind a stack of crates labeled biohazard. "We need a terminal inside," Elara said. "I need to find out where the main server is. If we destroy it, we destroy their hold on us. And maybe we get our memories back. Or we destroy ourselves." Nora warned. "I'll take that risk," Adrian said. "Nora, you check for medical supplies. If this is a lab, they have an infirmary. We might need adrenaline or stimulants." "Elara, find a port. I'll secure the corridor." They moved deeper into the facility. The hallways were sterile, white, and blindingly bright. They encountered a technician in a lab coat emerging from a room. Adrian was on him instantly, silencing him and dragging him into a janitor's closet. He stripped the keycard from the man's lanyard. "Level to access," Adrian noted. "That gets us down." They reached an elevator bank. Adrian swiped the card. The doors hissed open, but as they stepped in, the lights in the elevator flickered red. A voice came over the intercom, synthetic and female. "Welcome back, Subject 7, Subject 9, And Subject 12. The curator is expecting you. Please proceed to the atrium. Do not attempt to deviate. Security protocols are now lethal. The elevator began to descend, not up to the labs, but down, deep into the earth. They knew. Elara gasped, backing into the corner of the elevator car. They let us in. No, Adrian said, checking the magazine of his stolen pistol. He racked the slide. They opened the door. Now they're going to regret who they let inside. The numbers on the display dropped rapidly. B1, B2, B3, B4. They were descending into the belly of the beast, into the heart of the black site where their pasts had been stolen, and where their futures would be decided in blood. The elevator descent was smooth, terrifyingly so. There was no mechanical grinding, no shudder of cables, only the sensation of weightlessness and the rapid decrease of the floor numbers on the digital display. B4, B5, B6. They were plunging deep into the bedrock of the mountain, leaving the world of snow and wind far above. The red emergency light bathed the small cabin in the color of fresh blood, casting long, frantic shadows against the brushed steel walls. Adrian stood at the front, his weapon leveled at the doors. He checked the chamber of his pistol for the third time, a nervous tick born of the soldier's instinct to control the variables in a chaotic equation. Nora stood behind him, her face pale, gripping a scalpel she had swiped from a tray in the upper hallway, a pathetic weapon against armored guards. But it was all she had. Elara was huddled in the corner, clutching the ruggedized laptop to her chest like a shield, her eyes darting between the floor indicator and the camera lens in the ceiling. B10, the synthetic voice announced pleasantly. The archives. Final stop. The doors hissed open. Adrian didn't rush out. He pied the corner, slicing the room with his aim. He expected a firing squad. He expected a wall of lead. Instead, he found a library. The space was cavernous, a cathedral of concrete and glass that stretched upward into darkness. Rows upon rows of towering server racks hummed with a low, throbbing vibration, their blue status lights pulsing like the heartbeat of a sleeping god. But amidst the technology, they were artifacts of a more analog nature. Glass cases lined the center aisle, illuminated by spotlights. No guards, Adrian whispered, stepping out. The silence was heavier here than in the forest. It was a pressurized silence. They don't need guards, Elara said, following him, her voice trembling. The air, it feels static. The pressure is different. We are in a sealed biosphere. They moved down the central aisle. The glass cases contained objects. Personal effects. Nora stopped at the first case. Inside lay a blood-stained stethoscope, a pair of diamond earrings, and a stack of passports with different names but the same photo. Her photo. Subject 9. The plaque read, Asset Code, Nightingale. Status, Reset pending. These are mine, Nora whispered, horror dawning on her face. She looked at the passports. Dr. Nora Vance, Dr. Elara Krov, Sarah Jenkins. I wasn't a surgeon at a hospital. I was a cleaner. I patched up cartel members. I changed faces. She looked at her hands, the same hands that had saved Elara, seeing the blood on them not as a sign of healing, but of complicity. Caleb's case was next. It held a sledgehammer, a union card, and a dossier detailing structural sabotage and arson for hire. He hadn't just been a builder. He had been a destroyer. A man paid to bring buildings down with people inside them. And then, Adrian's case. It was empty. Where is mine? Adrian asked, his voice slow and dangerous. You don't have a case. Adrian, a voice boomed from the speakers, echoing through the vast chamber. It wasn't the synthetic voice of the elevator. It was a human male voice, cultured, calm, and terrifyingly familiar. You have a pedestal at the end of the aisle? A massive screen flickered to life. It showed a live feed of an office, furnished with mahogany and leather. A man sat behind the desk holder, silver-haired, watching them through the camera. Welcome home, architect, the man said. Who are you? Adrian demanded, aiming his gun at the screen. I am the curator, the man replied. And you, Adrian, are the crown jewel of the tabula rasa program. You designed the security protocols for this facility. You built the cage you are now running through. The amnesia wasn't a punishment. It was a glitch in your latest upgrade. You aren't a prisoner. You're the warden who lost his keys. The revelation hit Adrian like a physical blow. The familiarity with the traps, the knowledge of the guns, the tactical intuition. It wasn't just military training. It was ownership. He knew the facility because he had dreamt it into existence. You're lying, Adrian snarled. Am I? The curator smiled. Check the server room, Sector 7. Your biometrics are the only ones that can unlock the core. But be warned, the moment you enter that room, the facility enters sterilization mode. I cannot allow flawed assets to leave. The screen went black. Red alarm klaxons began to blare. The hum of the servers spiked to a high-pitched whine. The cooling vents in the ceiling hissed open, and a white, odorless gas began to descend. Nerve agent. Nora identified it instantly, sniffing the air. Fast-acting neurotoxin. We have maybe 5 minutes before paralysis sets in. Sector 7. Adrian barked, the shock of his identity shoved into a box for later. We need to get to the server room. Elara, can you override the gas? Not from here. Elara screamed, typing furiously on her laptop as they sprinted toward the heavy blast doors marked Sector 7. I need a hard line into the mainframe. They reached the door. It was a massive slab of titanium, sealed with a biometric scanner. Adrian hesitated. If the curator was right. He placed his hand on the panel. Beep. Access granted. Welcome, Chief of Security. The door groaned and slid open. They spilled into the server room. It was a freezing cold chamber, the air supercooled to protect the massive banks of processors. In the center stood the core, a pillar of pulsating light and fiber optics. Elara, plug in. Adrian shouted, spinning around to cover the door. Nora, find the ventilation controls. Elara ran to the central console. She jammed her cable into the port. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, a blur of motion. I'm in. 1C the gas distribution system. It's locked out. I have to bypass the firewall manually. Do it. I am. But double quotes. Elara stopped. She stared at the screen. The system. It's learning. It's countering my code. It's an AI. It's hunting me. The blast door they had just entered began to close. They're sealing us in. Nora yelled. No, Adrian said, watching the hallway. They're sealing us out. Through the narrowing gap of the door, figures emerged from the gas in the archives. They were not human. They were humanoid drones, sleek and faceless, moving with jerky, mechanical precision. Their arms ended in rotary cannons. Droids. Adrian cursed. I designed them. The phalanx units. He opened fire. His bullets sparked uselessly off the droid's chassis. They returned fire. The doorway erupted in a storm of concrete dust and ricochets. Elara, how long? I can't stop the gas without rebooting the core. Elara shouted, tears streaming down her face. But if I reboot, the door locks permanently. We'll be trapped inside. Is there another way out? Nora asked, ducking as a heavy caliber round shredded the server rack next to her. Yes, Elara said, her voice suddenly calm. She looked at a schematic on her screen. There's a maintenance hatch behind the core. It leads to the executive hangar. The escape route. Open it. I can't open it and keep the phalanx out, Elara said. She looked at Adrian. There was a clarity in her eyes that hadn't been there since the truck. Someone has to hold the digital line. The moment I disconnect, the blast door opens fully and those things come in. Someone has to stay at the console to keep the door at a choke point and force the hatch open. Adrian looked at her. No, we go together. You can't, Elara said. She typed a command. The maintenance hatch at the back of the room hissed open. The architect has to survive. You have to kill the curator. Adrian, only you can do it. Elara, don't do this, Nora pleaded, grabbing her arm. Elara pulled away. She smiled, a sad, broken smile. I remember now, she whispered. I wasn't a terrorist. I was a whistleblower. I tried to expose this place. They caught me and erased me. This is my second chance to finish the job. The phalanx drones were pushing against the blast door. Mechanical fingers pried at the metal. Go, Elara screamed, slamming her hand onto the execute key. The blast door slammed down, crushing the leading drone, but leaving a 6-inch gap at the bottom of firing slit. Elara grabbed a heavy server blade from the rack and jammed it into the console, physically shorting the circuit to lock the door in place. Sparks showered over her. Run. Adrian grabbed Nora by the vest and dragged her toward the maintenance hatch. He looked back one last time. Elara was standing at the console, bathed in the blue light of the core. She wasn't looking at them. She was looking at the screen, typing with one hand, flipping off the door with the other. System purge initiated, the computer announced. A burst of gunfire from the gap in the blast door caught her. Elara jerked violently. She fell against the console, but she didn't fall down. She slumped over the keyboard, her dead weight holding the enter key down. Purge continued. Adrian pushed Nora through the hatch and scrambled in after her. He hit the seal button. The hatch spun shut, locking with a heavy thud, sealing the sound of the server room away. They were in a dark, narrow service tunnel. The air was cold, but clean. No gas. Nora collapsed against the wall, sliding down until she hit the floor. She didn't cry. She just stared at nothing, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Two," she whispered. "To down." Adrian stood over her. He reloaded his pistol. His movements were robotic, stripped of all humanity. The grief was there, but he pushed it down, compressing it into a dense, volatile fuel. "She gave us the route," Adrian said, his voice void of emotion. She opened the path to the hangar. He reached down and hauled Nora to her feet. He wasn't gentle. He couldn't afford to be. "We are going to the hangar," Adrian said. "We are going to find the curator, and I am going to show him exactly what his masterpiece is capable of." "And then?" Nora asked, her eyes hollow. "And then," Adrian said, turning toward the ladder that led upward, "we burn it all down." They began the climb. Below them, the muffled sound of an explosion rocked the facility. Elara's final gift, the core detonating, taking the data and the drones with it. The architect and the surgeon climbed toward the surface, leaving the ashes of their friends behind in the dark. The service ladder was a vertical tunnel of cold steel that seemed to stretch into infinity, a dark artery connecting the dying heart of the facility to its brain. Adrian climbed with mechanical rhythm, his muscles burning with lactic acid, each pull of the rung a defiant act against gravity and exhaustion. Below them, the deep, muffled thump of the core detonating sent a vibration through the metal spine of the shaft, followed by a rush of warm, stale air smelling of ozone and pulverized concrete. Elara was gone. The server room was gone. The only way forward was up. Nora climbed below him. Her breathing was ragged, a harsh rasp in the confined space. She had stopped checking behind her. There was no point. The explosion had sealed the bottom of the shaft. They were trapped in a chimney, ascending toward a fate that was either liberation or execution. 30 feet. Adrian's voice echoed down, hollow and metallic. "I see the hatch." He reached the top. The wheel of the hatch was painted red, marked Emergency Egress Executive Hangar. It was not locked. The architect in him remembered this detail: a fail-safe for the leadership, a back door that bypassed all security protocols in case the experiments in the basement broke loose. He spun the wheel. The latches groaned, disengaging with a heavy clank. He pushed the heavy steel plate upward and hauled himself onto a polished concrete floor. He helped Nora up. She collapsed on the smooth surface, her white camouflage gear stained with grease, blood, and soot. She looked like a specter of war dragged into a palace. They were in a hangar, but it was unlike the industrial loading dock below. This was a private sanctuary. The walls were lined with sound-dampening acoustic panels. The lighting was soft and recessed. In the center of the vast space sat a sleek, twin-engine Gulfstream jet, its turbines idling with a low, predatory whine. The fuel truck was disconnected, the chocks pulled. It was ready to fly. Between them and the plane, set up like a grotesque viewing gallery, was a desk. It was an antique piece, heavy oak, out of place on the hangar floor. Sitting behind it was the curator. He was not surrounded by guards. There were no phalanx droids here. He sat alone, a crystal tumbler of amber liquid in his hand, watching them emerge from the floor like rats crawling out of a sewer. "Impressive," the curator said. His voice didn't boom over speakers this time. It carried naturally in the acoustic perfection of the hangar. Subject 12 Adrian, you always were pragmatic, and Subject 9 Nora resilient to a fault. I must admit, I expected the phalanx to catch you at the blast door. Elara's sacrifice was statistically improbable. Adrian stood up. He raised his pistol. The slide was locked back. He was empty. He dropped the useless weapon to the floor. The clatter was loud in the silence. It's over, Adrian said, stepping forward. The core is destroyed. The data is gone. Your blackmail is ash. The data was a backup, the curator said, taking a sip of his drink. He gestured to the plane. The real asset is the network, and the network survives as long as I do. He tapped a key on his laptop. A large monitor on the wall behind him flared to life. It displayed a bank account interface. The numbers were staggering 9 figures, rooting through the Cayman Islands, Singapore, and Zurich. This, the curator said, pointing to the screen, is the Ghost Fund. It's the retirement package for the Tabula Rasa program. It's accumulated fees from every regime change, every assassination, every corporate sabotage we've engineered over the last decade. He looked at Adrian and Nora with a paternal smile. And it is biometrically locked to the survivors of the final test. Nora stood up slowly, swaying slightly. You killed Caleb. You killed Elara. For money. For evolution, the curator corrected. The program isn't about punishment. It's about refinement. We strip away the weak. We strip away the morality. What remains is pure capability. You two, you are the distilled essence of survival. He stood up and walked around the desk. He was unarmed. He wore a bespoke suit that cost more than the house Adrian had grown up in if he could remember growing up. The plane is fueled, the curator said. The flight plan is filed for Hawaii, a non-extradition sanctuary. The account codes are on this drive. He held up a silver USB stick. Kill me, and the biometric lock seals the funds forever. You walk away with nothing but your trauma. Join me, board that plane as my partners, and you inherit the kingdom. Adrian looked at the curator. Then he looked at the plane. Then at Nora. Nora's eyes were dead. The surgeon, the healer, had been left behind in the snow. What stood there was the cleaner. She looked at the curator's neck, the carotid artery pulsing beneath the starch of his collar. Partners, Adrian repeated, testing the word. He walked closer to the desk. You want us to work for you again. After everything. Not for me. The curator smiled, extending the hand holding the drive. With me. You've passed the interview. Adrian stopped 3 feet from the man. He looked at the drive. Then he looked at the curator's eyes. He saw the arrogance there, the absolute certainty that everyone had a price, and that desperate people would always choose comfort over justice. You're right, Adrian said softly. I am pragmatic. He reached out, as if to take the drive. The curator's smile widened in one fluid motion. Adrian grabbed the curator's wrist, twisting it violently outward. Bone snapped. The curator gasped, the drive falling from his fingers. But Adrian didn't stop. He spun the man around, slamming his face into the oak desk. Nora. Adrian barked. Nora didn't hesitate. She lunged across the desk. She didn't have a knife. She grabbed the crystal tumbler the curator had been drinking from. She smashed it against the edge of the desk, leaving a jagged shard of heavy glass in her hand. The curator struggled, thrashing against Adrian's grip. You fools. The money. It's locked to my heartbeat. No, Adrian gritted out, holding the man's head down. I built the system. Remember, it's not locked to your heartbeat. It's locked to the director's biometrics. He looked at the curator, whose face was mashed against the wood, blood streaming from his nose. And by the laws of the program I wrote, Adrian whispered into the man's ear, if the director is compromised, authority transfers to the senior officer present. That's me. The curator's eyes went wide with realization and terror. Adrian, wait, do it. Adrian commanded. Nora drove the glass shard into the side of the curator's neck. It wasn't a clean surgical cut. It was a butcher's stroke. The curator convulsed, his hands clawing at the wood, then went limp. The silence returned to the hangar, heavy and final. Adrian released the body. It slid to the floor with a wet thud. He picked up the silver USB drive. He walked to the laptop. He placed his own hand on the scanner. Scanning. Identity confirmed. Architect. Authority transferred. The screen flashed green. The funds were unlocked. We have it, Adrian said, his voice flat. He pulled the drive. Access to the offshore accounts. All of it. Nora walked around the desk. She was trembling again, the adrenaline crash hitting her hard. She looked at the body of the man who had orchestrated their hell. She felt no satisfaction, only a cold, hollow emptiness. Does it bring them back? She asked, her voice cracking. No, Adrian said. He walked over to her and took the bloody glass shard from her hand, dropping it on the floor. But it gets us out. He turned toward the jet. We leave, now, before the external perimeter realizes the command signal has stopped. They walked up the stairs of the Gulf Stream. The interior was a palace of cream leather and walnut trim. It smelled of new money and sterile air. Adrian moved to the cockpit. He sat in the pilot's seat. His hands knew the controls. Muscle memory. He flipped the switches. APU start. Engine 1. Engine 2. The whine grew to a roar. Nora sat in the co-pilot seat. She didn't look at the controls. She stared out the window at the hangar floor, at the body of the curator lying in a pool of blood that looked black under the recessed lighting. Hawaii, she whispered. Why Hawaii? Because it's an island, Adrian said, releasing the brakes. The jet lurched forward, and because it's the last place they'll look for to ghosts who are supposed to be dead in a Canadian mountain range. He throttled up. The jet surged forward, exiting the hangar doors onto the hidden runway carved into the plateau. The snowstorm was still raging outside, a wall of white chaos. Ready? Adrian asked. Fly. Nora said. They accelerated. The runway lights blurred into streaks of fire. The nose lifted. The wheels left the ground. They punched through the storm clouds, climbing higher and higher until the turbulence ceased and the white turned to the calm, endless black of the stratosphere. Below them, the black sight was just a memory, a scar on the earth hidden by the storm. They were free. They were wealthy beyond imagination. But as Adrian engaged the autopilot and looked at Nora, he saw the same thing reflected in her eyes that he felt in his own heart. The tie to the facility was severed, but the tie between them forged in blood and deceit was now the only thing holding them to the earth and in the silence of the cockpit. The first seed of the final betrayal began to take root. The humidity of Kauai was a physical weight, a stark inversion of the dry, biting cold of the Canadian Rockies. Here, the air was thick with the scent of rotting jungle fruit, salt spray, and the intoxicating perfume of plumeria. It was a landscape of aggressive vitality, where vines strangled trees in slow motion, and the ocean hammered the volcanic cliffs with relentless, rhythmic violence. 3 months had passed since the Gulf Stream touched down on a private airstrip in Honolulu, followed by a series of shell company transfers, boat charters, and identity scrubbings that had landed them here. They occupied a glass-walled fortress perched on the edge of the Napali coast, isolated by miles of dense rainforest and accessible only by a single gated road or a helicopter pad. To the outside world, they were investment bankers on an indefinite sabbatical. To the mirror, they were ghosts hunting a paradise they had purchased with blood. Adrian stood on the lanai, staring out at the Pacific. The sun was setting, bleeding purple and gold into the horizon. He wore linen now, loose and expensive, but the posture underneath was still rigid. He scanned the tree line constantly. He checked the perimeter sensors on his tablet every hour. The amnesia had lifted in fragments, returning to him not as a narrative, but as a technical manual. He remembered how to build a kill box. He remembered how to dismantle a government. But he still didn't remember why. Inside the sprawling master suite, cooled to clinical chill by the air conditioning, Nora sat at a teak desk. The stolen silver USB drive was plugged into a decryption rig. She had assembled a tower of high-end processors masked as a home entertainment system. For weeks, she had been mining the ghost fund data, laundering the money through a labyrinth of crypto wallets to ensure it could never be traced back to the curator's murder. But today, she wasn't looking at the money. She had bypassed the financial partition and breached the personnel archive. The screen cast a pale blue glow on her face, highlighting the new hardness around her eyes. The surgeon was gone. The survivor had taken her place. On the screen, a video file played. It was grainy, black and white footage from a drone. The timestamp was dated 3 months ago. Location: the Blackwater Bridge. Nora watched, her breath held in her chest like a stone. The video showed the bridge collapsing. It showed Caleb falling into the gorge. But then, the camera angle shifted. It tracked the fall. Before Caleb hit the water, a cable deployed from beneath the bridge structure, a safety line attached to a harness hidden under his jumpsuit. He swung into a hidden alcove in the cliff face. A recovery team was waiting. They didn't shoot him. They pulled him in. They handed him a towel. Caleb wiped his face, looked up at the drone, and gave a thumbs up. Nora froze the frame. She stared at the face of the man who had supposedly died for them. There was no fear in his eyes, only the satisfaction of a job well done. She opened the next file. Subject: Elara. Status: extraction successful. The footage showed the server room. The blast door slammed shut. Elara slumped over the console. But seconds after Adrian and Nora had entered the escape hatch, the phalanx droids stopped firing. They lowered their weapons. A medical team entered from the side door. The door Elara had claimed was sealed. They revived her with an injection. She sat up, rubbing her neck, and began typing a report on a tablet. Nora scrolled down to the mission summary text. Operation: Velocity Objective. Stress test the architect. Subject 12. Through extreme survival scenarios. Observers: Agent Caleb physical stressor. Agent Elara cognitive stressor. RESULT. Subject 12 successfully reactivated lethal protocols. Subject 9 collateral asset exceeded survival projections. Phase 2. Monitor Subject 12 in paradise scenario. Await memory reintegration. Nora sat back in her chair. The silence of the room was deafening. The buzzing of the cicadas outside sounded like the drone of the truck tires, a loop she could never escape. They hadn't escaped. They had just moved to the next level of the simulation. Caleb and Elara hadn't been friends. They were proctors. The curator was a mid-level manager played by an actor, and Adrian. She looked at the file named The Architect. She clicked it. Documents flooded the screen. Blueprints, schematics, memos. Adrian hadn't just designed the prison. He had designed the program, the psychological torture, the false hope, the friends who died to motivate the subject. It was all his methodology. He had written the script for his own suffering. Why? A note in the margin, written in Adrian's own handwriting, answered her. To understand the flaw in the system, the creator must become the rat in the maze. Total memory wipe required for authentic data. Nora closed the laptop. She felt a cold, crystal and clarity wash over her. It was the same feeling she had when she excised the tracker from Elara's neck. The rot had to be cut out. She stood up and walked to the wet bar. She opened a bottle of vintage Pinot Noir, allowing the wine to breathe. Then, she reached into her pocket. She didn't have tetrodotoxin or cyanide. She had something far more poetic. During their escape through the Black Site's pharmacy, she had swiped a vial marked pneumotoxin, a compound Adrian himself had developed. It didn't kill the body. It obliterated the mind. It dissolved the neural pathways that held personality, memory, and motor function, leaving the subject a breathing, empty husk. A vegetable. She poured the wine into 2 crystal glasses. She tipped the contents of the vial into one. The clear liquid swirled into the deep red and vanished. She walked out to the lawn. Sunset is beautiful tonight, Nora said softly, stepping up beside him. Adrian turned. He looked tired. The burden of the perimeter, of the constant vigilance, was wearing him down. He took the glass she offered. It's quiet, Adrian said, looking at the dark line of the ocean. Too quiet. I keep expecting a drone. We're safe here, Adrian. Nora lied, her voice steady and soothing. The curator is dead. The files are decrypted. We won, did we? Adrian took a sip of the wine. He swirled the liquid, watching the legs run down the glass. I have this feeling, like I've forgotten something important. Something terrible. You have, Nora said. She didn't drink. She watched him. You forgot who you are, Adrian frowned. He took another long sip, draining half the glass. I know who I am. I'm the man who got us out. No, Nora said, stepping back slightly. You're the man who put us in. Adrian paused. He looked at her, confusion clouding his sharp features. He tried to speak, but his tongue felt heavy, numb. The glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the slate tiles. Nora, he slurred. What? I saw the files. Adrian, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. I saw Caleb. I saw Elara. They're alive. They're laughing. They're waiting for phase 2. Adrian stumbled back, gripping the railing. His legs were failing. The neurotoxin was aggressive, attacking the motor cortex instantly. Panic flared in his eyes, not the panic of a victim, but the terrified realization of a creator recognizing his own weapon. You ... double quotes, he gasped, saliva drooling from the corner of his mouth. You ... stopped. The test. I ended the loop. Nora corrected. She watched as he collapsed. He fell hard, hitting the deck chair, sliding down to the floor. His eyes were wide open, staring up at the darkening sky, but the light behind them was fading rapidly. The intelligence, the tactical genius, the ruthlessness, it was all dissolving into white noise. He tried to crawl toward her. His hand reached out, trembling, fingers clawing at the air. Help, he whispered, a child's plea from a monster's throat. There is no help, Nora said. There is only the outcome. She stood over him until the trembling stopped, until his breathing shallowed to a rhythmic, vegetative rasp. He wasn't dead. He would never die. He would live for decades in a state of suspended animation, trapped in a body that could feel but not respond, a prisoner in the ultimate solitary confinement. Nora stepped over him. She walked to the railing and looked down at the crashing waves hundreds of feet below. Her phone buzzed. It lay on the small table next to the wine bottle. It was a burner phone, one that no one should have the number for. She picked it up. Double quotes, hello, Nora, a voice said. It was warm, deep, and familiar. Caleb, she said. She wasn't surprised. We saw the vitals drop on the telemetry, Caleb said. The architect is offline. That wasn't in the script, Nora. I rewrote it, she replied, looking at the empty shell of Adrian on the floor. You know, we can't let you keep the money, Caleb said, his tone shifting from friendly to professional. We have a team inbound. ETA 10 minutes. Don't run. It's just a debrief. Nora smiled. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the detonator she had rigged to the gas main of the house earlier that afternoon. She had learned well. She had learned from the best. Caleb, she said, her thumb hovering over the button. You forget what Adrian taught us. What's that? The only way to win the game, Nora said, watching the headlights of a helicopter crest the ridge in the distance, is to burn the board. She pressed the button. The explosion was not a tragedy. It was a liberation. A flower of orange fire bloomed against the Hawaiian night, consuming the glass fortress, the money, the architect, and the surgeon. The shockwave rolled out over the ocean, carrying the sound of the blast miles away, finally moving faster than the silence that had chased them for so long. On the dark water below, the debris rained down like burning stars, hissing as it hit the waves, vanishing into the deep, cold embrace of the Pacific.